your coffee really quickly, you can, but we're about to get started. And are you ready for us, Darius? Are we on? Okay. I'm going to sit down quickly because I want to give Kathy plenty of time. As many of you may have heard me say, Kathy is a friend of mine from a parish that I served in Maryland. We worked together. She was a parent at the time and for many of those years, chair of our youth commission. So we worked together doing a lot of youth ministry. And during that time, because I was at that parish for 11 years, Kathy had a vocational journey of her own, and I'm sure she can fill in more of those details as she wants to today for this presentation. But where that's led her to now in her work with restorative practices is to be someone out in a big school district, Anne Arundel County School District, as the school climate specialist for that district, doing significant work with young people and conflict resolution, a completely different approach to discipline that really helps empower young people and really transforms lives and spaces in some significant ways. So she's going to tell us a bit about that work and what's behind that work, but also help us gain some sense of hope as we see what folks in the generation is doing and the possibilities that are there when we look at a world that often feels like we're stuck and so divided. That is not the case. There are so many ways, and these practices that Kathy will tell us about make a huge difference. So please welcome my friend Kathy Rockefeller.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not used to having this excellent tech equipment. The public schools aren't quite up to that level now. So my name is Kathy Rockefeller. My wonderful husband is in the back. He's a great supporter. Rick, I'm sure he's just tickled to hear me talk again about what I talk about all the time, which I love, but I do appreciate him. So I want to talk a little bit about how I got here, but not long, and then I want to just give you an explanation about what are restorative practices, and then a couple of stories, because that's the hopeful part, and then we'll take questions, okay? So my background is I'm a recovering attorney, and I have not practiced law in many years, but after I realized that I couldn't sink head and heart in the practice of law as a litigator, I could not make that work. I realized I can't do this anymore. Of course, we still, as Rick can tell you, we still had large law school loans that we were paying off for me. And so I thought, well, maybe I could get into mediation. I'd kind of be like, shoulder to shoulder with being a lawyer, but not quite being in that role. And so I did. I became trained as a mediator. And then for 11 years, I ran a nonprofit in Howard County, Maryland, when we were at Jenny's Church. And loved it. Wonderful people. They were all volunteers, and they helped with any sort of conflict that was happening in the community that people would call and say, we'd like some help. So that was a wonderful time. And at the end of that time, in the last 3 years maybe, we joined with Community Mediation Maryland to help them execute a grant that they had that was to prove. This was the goal of the grant. They were to prove that incarcerated people, if they had a chance at professional conflict resolution before they were released back into the community, that they would have a less chance of recidivating, meaning coming back. Okay? It was a great part of research, and it's a piece that has not been solved in our community. We don't know how to stop people from coming back to prison, and we're terrible at it. They come back all the time. No wonder. We give them $250, say good luck on the bus, right? I mean, no wonder. But this was an interesting piece of research, and as part of that research, once a month, I would go in behind the bars, if you would like to say it that way, and speak with about 30 people about what mediation was and conflict resolution, and invite their outside people in before they were released back to the community. So I got to know some people, but I had to collect data, for the grant, right? And one of the questions we had to ask every time was, how old were you when you first kind of crossed that line to not following the rules or the laws? How old were you? And every year I had to gather those statistics and report on them for the grant. And every year, about 85% of the time, people said it all started with a suspension in middle school. So I was like holding that, and it really struck me for whatever reason, that is the piece that I took away. And I was thinking, I need to do something about this, but what do I have? What thing can I cash in? What credibility do I have that I can get some more help with conflict resolution earlier for students? And around that same time, they published the School to Prison Pipeline Study, which was a federal study, and really, really did prove that people who had any suspensions starting in middle school were way more likely to go, have terrible outcomes. End up in prison. That doesn't mean if you had a suspension in middle school, you go to prison, right? But it's more likely, right? And also not graduate, and also do poorly, and also get into drugs. There were terrible outcomes. And so that was kind of in my head. And so then I heard about restorative justice. Restorative practices is what we call them in our school district, and it's under the theoretical umbrella of restorative justice. So it is a piece of restorative justice. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. It's always really hard to explain it quickly. It's not a quick answer. In fact, all the early writings are well, here's what it's not. And then they list all the things that the punitive justice system does, right? But it's easier to say what it's not than to say what it is. So I'm hoping I can encapsulate that for you here. And then I want to talk a little bit about my work and how we're doing it in our large, we have 83,000 students. It's a large public school district in a county that has many, many private schools. So there's a bit of a brain drain, right? And there's a wealth drain, and there's a parental involvement drain in my schools. The students that I'm serving are very similar in most of our schools to students in downtown Baltimore. And it's been an amazing journey. So today we learned a little bit about being that light. Thank you. I would like to think that this is the way I'm able to bring forward a little bit of light, because it does definitely feel like a calling. It definitely feels like I'm supposed to be doing this, which is, I'm really lucky. Not many people have that in their jobs, that you feel like you're supposed to be doing this. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what restorative practices are. The practices are this. So the restorative justice is an umbrella theory, and then you have the practices that we use in schools that are restorative, the practices that we use in social work that are restorative, the practices that we use in many different areas that are restorative, all right? So what the basic thing is that makes something restorative, like I said, I'm trying not to tell you what it's not. I'm trying to tell you what it is. And what it is, first of all, community building matters. It matters. We need to intentionally build community all the time. And I would suggest that in our days, when our children are like this, and so are we, it's even more important. There's less and less community being built in an intentional way. It also emphasizes face-to-face connection. That's similar, right? Non-tech. Can you do it online? Yeah, you can. It's not nearly as effective. It really works well from face-to-face, and it focuses on the harm done. Who was harmed? Rather than what rule was broken and how can we prove it. The focus is who was harmed and how can we fix it? Not what rule was broken and how can we prove it. This is our criminal justice system. You recognize it, right? And in the schools, that criminal justice system has trickled in very, very pronouncedly. And if you look at the code of conduct, this is what they do in schools. You did X, you get Y. Even if no one was harmed, or if someone was harmed so egregiously that they're really, really in terrible position, the code of conduct discipline does not address who was harmed. So victims often come out, and this is true of court too, right? And they're pissed. They're not even allowed to see the person who harmed them. They're not even allowed in the courtroom many times, right? They feel unheard. Because they are unheard. We have no way to help them. The big revelation was when I was in law school and they allowed witness statements to be used only at sentencing. So you'll see that in shows sometimes, right? People can say how they were affected by the fact that they were attacked or their person was killed or something like that. And they get to be heard. That was a big, huge thing. But that's way separate from the trial and way separate from anything having to do with the offender. Okay? So that's what I wanted you to know about it. Also, restorative practices includes the affected members of the community. So not only does it include or invite, because victims can say no thank you. It is always optional. But we do invite victims to be part of it if they want, and also a member of the affected community. So we think of community as overlapping, not just a zip code. So like in your parish here, you probably have the community of the 9 o'clock service, which we just enjoyed, the community of the day school, the community of, and many people overlap in different communities. When you think of communities that way, it helps you understand why it's important to have a member of the affected community, right? What community did this affect? Right? Did it really affect the 9 o'clock service, or did it really just affect the day school and Miss So-and-so's class? And that's how we know how to repair the harm. Because if you're really looking at things from what harm was done and how can we repair it, you have to know who was affected. And for our youth, having a person in the circle, which is usually what we use, who can say, here's how I was affected. Wow. Imagine that. Isn't that actually harder to face the person that you harmed than to go home for 2 days for suspension? And doesn't that make more sense? And isn't it more likely to bring out of you what we're wanting to teach these kids, an intrinsic feeling that I owe my communities? If I have harmed them, I should repair it. It's not, if I've harmed them, I should get a punishment. It's harder. It's harder. And so many people say to me, this stuff's just hugs and lollipops. We don't believe in that. Well, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be doing this if it was just hugs and lollipops. And if it is just hugs and lollipops, they're doing it wrong. It is about accountability. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. The main tools that we use in our school system are community building circles, which are just fun circles, okay, every day. 5 restorative questions, which are amazing. They're just a great tool. They get you right to who was affected and how, and what can you do to repair the harm. And using circles in response to harm, which the stories that I'm going to share today are about those circles, okay? Circles have been used for centuries. I wouldn't be worth my salt as a restorative practitioner if I didn't say, we did not create these circles. They've been used by indigenous peoples all over the world for centuries and centuries and centuries, and we need to give a nod of thanks to our ancestors. Just because we've gotten away from them doesn't mean we're inventing them now, okay? So think about even way back, right? Tribal people, they would gather in a circle, probably around a fire. So they gathered in a circle to experience the light and the warmth of the community. So circles have been used to build community and also resolve conflict. They also go to the circle when there is a conflict that needs to be addressed, okay? That's the same 2 things they do in schools. This is just a quick continuum. All the way over on this side, here's our proactive pieces. This is building community through these community building circles, right? We're having fun, we're talking with the kids, we're getting to know them on a different level. And then, if there is a harm, we're in a much better place on the responsive side to respond to that harm. They care about that community, and they know that community cares about them. So if we say, you're going to be put out of community, then it means something. They don't want to leave that community. So that gives them motivation to do the right thing. It fits with brain science as well. So when we have, and we're learning more and more about this, when we have, our amygdala is our emotional part of our brain. When the amygdala is pinging, bing, 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 the part of our brain that can reason is shut. Period, end of story. Even if we really care about that teacher and we want to learn from that teacher, we can't open that brain until that teacher is able to calm our amygdala. And many kids, in fact, I would say all because I consider COVID a trauma, many kids are very much impacted by trauma, and that means their amygdala is binging all the time. And even if we weren't having trauma in our society, middle schoolers are binging all over the place, right? That's where they are developmentally, right? If we want to teach them, if we want to deliver content, we have to help them open up the neocortex, the reasoning part of their brains. And so the last sentence here to the right says, the more we create climates of safe relationships, when they feel safe psychologically, the neocortex can open up and receive. They have to feel safe. It's part of our old primitive brain where we would sort of quickly judge, that's a safe community, that's not a safe community, basically like, lions aren't safe for us, people are safe for us, like that. It's really kind of that same thing. And it's what we fight against if we're really working on being anti-racist. It's what we fight against. We fight our brain. If we don't want to be racist, we have to kind of keep our brain from making that automatic judgment, or at least check ourselves as quickly as possible. Okay? If we care about school safety, this is the way to go. What do we hear every time we hear about a school shooting? He was a loner. Not connected. Seems like he was nice, but I didn't really know him, right? Every time you're talking about someone who's completely unconnected. If you're disconnected in your school community, you don't care what happens to it. That becomes a possibility in your life. If you're completely disconnected, that is very unsafe. So I don't care. I don't care if people want to put metal detectors in the doorways of schools to keep them safe. Okay, fine. But this is the real answer. We got to do better. And this is not fixable quickly with money, and it's not fixable quickly, period. We got to do better. And it is on us, right? So anonymity is our enemy, and relationship is the antidote. So we have to build relationships in our schools. Once a community is built, when harm happens within it, restorative practices looks at things differently. I want to talk for just a minute about what is accountability. What are your thoughts? What is accountability? True accountability.
Taking ownership.
Ownership, 100%. And what else? Because I'm going to argue that there's another element.
Being responsible.
Being responsible, which is action. In my book, it's action. So for me, accountability is owning what you did and doing something about it. Just owning it isn't enough. Yeah, I did it. Just fixing it isn't really enough. Whatever, I'm not going to admit that I did it, but I'll clean these tables off, whatever. You really need both for true accountability. Does suspension fill that meaning? Because the public says they have to be accountable. Kids aren't accountable these days. They need 10 days for every time they fight. They need 8 days for every time they do this. But, the whole idea, I don't mind being strict or firm. I don't mind that. But that isn't working. Period. End of story. And it's all we have in schools, right? We don't have, thank God, we don't have physical punishment in schools anymore. So when a harm happens, we only have various types of removing from community. Suspension being extreme, also sending to an alternative ed school, right? You have to go to the bad kids school. And moving kids to what we call DMR, decision-making room, some sort of detention. But notice, every single one of them is just removal from community. It's never going to work if they don't feel part of the community. And it doesn't. In every school I'm in, it doesn't work at all. It just doesn't work. It's all we have, but it doesn't work. So we keep kind of living this farce. And it's so frustrating when you've seen how amazing kids can be in another direction. So when you hear about people talking about accountability, kids today are not accountable, they need to be more accountable, our schools should be stricter. Yes, they need to be accountable. What we're doing now doesn't have anything to do with accountability, unfortunately. So if you don't want to lose the feeling of belonging in your community, it increases your willingness to self-check. And we want our children to self-check, right? So like if you know you're going to be with that group again, you're more likely to self-check, right? I know when I'm with a group of educators in my county, I'm not going to pull out my phone and be rude to them and just be kind of checking in when I want to. But if I'm with 1,000 people in a big lecture hall at a conference, some other state, I'm much more likely to feel like I can really violate their rules, pull out my own phone, not pay attention only if I feel like it, right? Because I don't do as much self-checking there because I'm not going to see them again. They're not my people, my community, right? So we have to build community building. We have to spend the time to do that. In our county, unfortunately, during this last year, they chose to take community building circles out of the schedule, right? They needed it for academia. The scores need to be brought up. It's only 9 to 11 minutes of their day, and it grounds the kids and opens up their neocortex, and they're able to hear. Teachers tell me it's their favorite part of the day, especially elementary teachers. Sometimes high school teachers are like, yeah, I didn't go to school to be their friends. And I just, really, I'm not asking you to be their best friend. Believe me, I don't think you'd be a great friend for them, but you still have to have some sort of relationship. And if you're going to teach, you have to be able to help them open up that neocortex, like it or not. So, here's what RP would be different in schools. We focus on the harm done, not the rule violated. When harm is done, an obligation arises to repair it. If you did something, you're obliged to fix it. We grew up that way. I did. If I did something, I was required to fix it, okay? The obligation to repair is on the person who did it. The repair should include the person and the community harmed. Face-to-face processes are preferred, and participation is always voluntary. Responsive circles, meaning the circles in response to a harm. So something's happened, and you're having a circle. And the great thing is they hold students truly accountable, but they also teach, which is, aren't those the shoes we should be in as educators? We should be in the teacher shoes, not the cop shoes. Unfortunately, we got a lot of teachers and administration, people in charge of discipline, who are really loving, I'm going to gather this evidence, I'm going to get the video recording, I'm going to get the statements, they're going to sign the statements. Like, all of the words are criminal justice words. And these kids are 11 and 12. And we are required from our forms to fill in who was the victim and who was the offender. That is so damaging. It's just as damaging to label somebody an offender as a victim. It's damaging. What are we doing that for? They're all participants. Yes, we should talk to them about it. Yes, we should work with them. We have to teach them. That's what it's about, not just punishing for the sake of punishing. And the questions are designed to help the students understand why it mattered what they did. Who did they affect? How did they affect them? They don't understand that. They aren't required to think about that. They're just sent out. We have to teach them, or we're really in a load of trouble. We really are. And in the circles, students and members of the affected community work together to make a plan around how the student can repair the harm they caused. So really, you're kind of working together to build an honorable pathway back to the community. So imagine a middle school student who acts horrible to a principal and a teacher, and throws over a desk and yells and curses and runs out of the room. That's a typical sort of disrespect referral. Well, that student can't just come back to that classroom as though nothing's happened. It's not fair to the teacher. It's not fair to the other kids, the community of that classroom, and it's really not right for that student. And that student, when they come back, because now we don't do anything. They just have their time, and then they come back, right? And the teachers are like, I don't feel safe with her. I don't feel safe with him, right? Because that's what happened. But they have to work together to build an honorable pathway back. He's not just a bad kid anymore. He's still part of our community. I know he worked with the teacher and they decided he would do X and Y. He's done that and now he's back with us. That's the way we need to be handling people, because every one of these students comes back. Just like every one of the incarcerated people enters back into society. It's like 97%. They're coming back. We can't get rid of them. They're coming back. So we have a responsibility to do something to teach them. I love this phrase because it helps me explain accountability. Every society, or every school in my case, can only control those who perceive themselves to be members of it. If you want them to follow the rules, you better work hard to build community, because otherwise we can't control them. And now I'm going to share a couple of stories. Where am I with time? Oh gosh. I'll just share one story and then I'll open up for questions. Does that sound good? Okay. As you might imagine, anyone who's had daughters or been near a middle school girl ever in her life, many of my cases are 7th, 8th, 9th grade girls fighting. And I mean, are they ever fighting? They're just doing terrible stuff. And sometimes the moms are driving them to the fight, and it's just this awful situation, right? And so I come in, these are my favorite girls. They're my favorites, right? What they're saying is preposterous, just awful. But it fits in their whole scheme of things. I can see how they got to where they are, right? What they're thinking. What they're thinking isn't logical, but it does fit with what they're thinking. And they've been fighting all year. So this was 2 8th grade girls at one of our large middle schools, and they had been fighting all years. There had been at least 3 suspensions between them, and one girl was arrested at one point, and somebody's stepfather was also arrested for going after the other girl on the school steps. Just preposterous, right? And you think, oh, our schools are terrible. Well, there's 1,000 kids at that school. These are a very small percentage of those 1,000 kids. So remember that when you see these on the news, right? But this is where I'm sent to. And which I really do joke, because often they don't look like me, they don't sound like me. I'm like, really? I'm the best you can do? An old white woman named Rockefeller? Really? And apparently I am, which is very sad. And the girls probably just initially look at me like, oh, God, lady, right? Get out of here. You can never understand this. And they're right. The best way I can bring them to my side is to just stay, because they haven't been used to many people staying. Just stay with them in their ickiness, in their awfulness. I'm willing to wade through it with them. So there was a large social media presence, and these 2 girls, according to the administration, have been fighting since October. They called me in May. I think they were trying to do everything they could first, which is how it's supposed to be, and they just made it worse. Meaning well, we just don't have it set up right. So the 2 girls, I always do a pre-circle interview first with them separately. It's a very scripted thing, and I'm looking for certain pieces of information, and what I learned is that the whole 8th grade had to choose sides. I'm either with her or I'm with her. There was almost nobody in the middle. And when I talked with them separately, it was super clear to me that there was a boy telling them opposite things. A boy was playing them. Some squirrely 7th grade boy was telling one girl one thing and telling the other girl the other thing. Oh, she said this about you. You don't want to let her say this about, and that was happening. And that was the main source of this horrific fight that ended up in all sorts of stuff. Throwing one girl down the steps, just terrible stuff that you see on the news. And so I talked to them separately, and I immediately knew it wasn't going to be a safety issue in that circle. I do have to think about safety, obviously. So it was the 2 of them and another staff person who was a member of the affected community. So the 4 of us are in this circle, which is really a square, actually, if you think, 4. Anyway, the 2 girls immediately realized, oh, he said what? He said what? He what? And all the tension was gone. And then we went through the rest of the 5 questions, and at the end I said, so, how are you going to tell your friends that the beef is over? How are you going to tell your friends? And there was a long pause, and one of the girls said, I guess we could eat lunch together one day. And the other girl said, yeah, they're going to be shook. The two of them burst into laughter. The fight was resolved. There were no more suspensions, but now they have those on their list. They have those on their record. One girl had gone to the other girl's house after school with a bunch of friends and broadcast it on live and picked up a piece of mulch and aimed it at the girl's window. And she was arrested for brandishing a weapon. Because they decide that based on whether it's reasonable for the person up there to think that was a real weapon, and it was. Right? But imagine, and I went back 2 weeks later, I said, how's it going, girls? And they both said separately, oh, it's great. Why didn't they do this with us sooner in that year, this year? It ruined our whole 8th grade year. I said, I don't know, honey. I wish they had. Right? So that's a hopeful story. I see it again and again. And it does kind of require me to wade into not fun situations, but it's doable. And our kids do rise to it. And they have better solutions than ours. They really do. If they fought, they should still have a suspension. I'm not like, get rid of all suspensions forever. But what happened was really out of line. So with that, I will open it up to anybody who wants to ask questions. Yeah?
A question about that particular case.
Mm-hmm.